Welcome, Shodo.
Okay, thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Happy to see everyone. Happy to see my friend Lynn. I told a few people. I think I was at one of those discussions about self, and so I thought, oh, let's talk about the self. And there are so many things to say. I will just start. I'll start with the 4 seals of Buddhism. So basic, classic background information. So the 4 seals means it's in the sense of a signature or a stamp, that the seals are how you can tell this is actually a Buddhist teaching, or this is a path of the Buddha, whether it claims to be Buddhism or not. And so here are the 4. All compounded things are impermanent. Suffering, which is such a long subject that I won't say it. Life is not satisfactory. Emptiness, also known as no self, also known as no inherent existence. And the 4th one is nirvana. And sometimes they say nirvana is peace. So one of those refers to how we view the self. Now, in ordinary life, and particularly in, say, modern Western culture, we think we have a pretty standard shared idea of what the self is. It's independent. It's lasting or permanent. Some people think that we have souls that go on after death. Some people don't, but we tend to think that this self, for instance, that this is the same one who was born quite a few years ago now, and the same one that will go through life and go through changes and die. And so this is very tricky. If we think we have a permanent self, we also think our self can be annihilated. And that gives rise to a lot of suffering, a lot of fear. And then we think we're special. I've noticed this in my own life, and I threw that in there. So this is our cultural understanding of what a person's self is. It's different in other cultures. And I recently ran across a remarkable statement by Ivan Illich, who studied language a lot. And he said this. Well, he said first that in oral cultures, they don't have this idea of the self at all. And then he says, one may retain an image of what has been yesterday, at the time of the full moon, last spring, but the person then or now exists only in the doing or telling. As a suffix comes to life only when it modifies a verb. Like a candle, the eye lights up only in the activity and is extinguished at other times, not dead. With retelling of the story, the candle comes to glow again. No pilot light gives continuity to the first person singular between one story and the next. The I can exist only in the act of speaking out loud or to oneself internally. So he's saying that before writing, there's a self that arises and falls, and arises and falls again. This is so like the Buddhist sense of self that I was called to bring it to you, to say, this isn't just some weird idea from Buddhism. This is a very common idea in the history of human life. The self is relational. There's a self right now that's speaking that only exists because there are listeners. I would not give this talk if you weren't there. So he says again, the idea of a self that continues to glimmer in thought or memory, occasionally retrieved and examined in the light of day, cannot exist without the text. Where there is no alphabet, there can neither be a memory conceived as a storehouse, nor the I as its appointed watchman. With the alphabet, both text and self become possible, but only slowly. And they become the social construct on which we found all our perceptions as literate people. We cannot conceive facing each other except as selves. The image of the self that we have inherited seems to us fundamental for Western culture. And then the last thing I'll quote from him, he says, we are not fools enough to propose, even as a joke, to return to ethnic silence. The silence co-presence before words, language, and text came into being. We are children of the book, but in our sadness, we are silly enough to long for the one silent space that remains open in our examined lives. And that is the silence of friendship. When I studied a text called the Samdhinirmochana, which is a kind of pre-Vajrayana text and very difficult and abstract, some of this is what was there. We grasp the world through ideas, through qualities, through thinking that things have existence. And that's how we function in life. I couldn't say, make my breakfast without kind of objectifying some of the things involved. I think I couldn't. But what's actually going on is dependent arising, or let's say interdependent arising, which means that everything creates everything else. And if you think about physics, or if you think about ecology, which we're understanding more and more about, you can think of this on a physical level. Oh, yeah, like my food creates me, and the mycelia in the forest create the soil that makes it possible for the trees to live, and everything contributes to everything else's life. So we have in today's culture a way of understanding this already. And that way is being spoken more and more as the drawbacks of thinking in terms of permanence and separate self are becoming more visible. And the third level of reality is the absolute. And as far as I could tell, the absolute means those things that we use to grasp stuff, they're not real. They're not the same as the thing that's really happening, which is everything creating everything else all the time. Now, thinking about the self causes suffering. And this would have to be a piece of trivia, because I happened to read a book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess by a neurosurgeon named Leonard Shlain, in which he tracked the relationship between literacy and violence societal violence. And every time there was an increase in literacy, he found an increase in violence. The last one that made it into the book was the arrival of the printing press, which coincided with the witch burnings. Now, he had a neurological explanation, which may or may not be true. But when I put that together with the thought, oh, literacy has to do with ideas of a self. When you think you have a permanent self, you have a lot to lose. You know, you can be snuffed out, or you can be made to be different from who you are or who you think you are. You can discover that you're selfish, or you can discover that you're not as skillful as you would like to be. And so there's just like a lot of things to worry about, which means a lot of things to suffer about. And then I'll just mention, in terms of where we are now and what we think of ourselves, we're the result of 100 years of advertising, whose purpose was to convince us that we have permanent independent selves in order that we could be manipulated. This goes to Edward Bernays, who is the nephew of Sigmund Freud. He actually worked with Hitler to manipulate people in Germany. He worked with United States corporations to help them sell things. And there's a free movie on YouTube, 4 hours, called Century of the Self. Discussing his work. And if you look at the first 50 years of it, it all looks a little ridiculous because we've gone beyond that. But that sense of I exist, I'm important, I need to express myself. So I'm going to express myself how? By what kind of clothes I wear, by what kind of house I have, by what kind of car I drive. That was the earlier part. And now we have by what kind of experiences I do, or by what kind of words I put forth. With the internet, we can express ourselves through blog posts and photos and all kinds of stuff. And so we live in a society that really offers us many possibilities to be a self, to put forward a self-image, and to be worried about that self. So here we are. Now, I will mention that another characteristic of this time is a lot of visible suffering. You know, today it's war in Ukraine has the spotlight. And I know I'm not the only one, but watching pictures of that war is like watching pictures of my relatives. They have light skin, and a lot of them have blonde hair. And it's like I'm used to seeing pictures of brown people and Black people who are getting bombed and so forth. And so this enters our consciousness in a kind of a funny way. It's like, oh, people like me are getting hurt. I could get hurt. And so since the war didn't end in the first 2 days, as people on all sides were hoping, there's been a rising of people saying, well, what about Syria? What about Yemen? What about West Sahara? What about Palestine? What about Afghanistan? What about the kids who are still in cages at the border in the US? You know, what about all those other places of suffering? And why are we just talking about this one? And, you know, it's impossible to tell good and bad because we know that the powers, everyone has an agenda. And so they will say the things that support their agenda. And I don't think that that's less true of the United States government than it is of the Russian government or the Ukrainian government with that charming leader. You know, we are asked to feel emotional and to be invested in certain people and certain causes. And to let go of those ideas and to move back into a sense where we know that we don't quite know what's going on. I mean, if it were me and my house and a bomb hitting it, I would have a little more clarity, but I still wouldn't know why they did it. I would only know why they said they did it and why the other people said they did it. And I mean, my big mystery, I'm a little puzzled about why that war is happening in Ukraine. I'm more puzzled about why global warming is apparently essential to the way we operate in civilization. And what I do with that is simply, so I have to practice moment by moment without thinking that I know the answers. I look for the best guesses as to who might be putting out trustworthy information. But that can become a full-time job, and I have responsibilities in this life also. So, so I thought, so I'm throwing these things out here as stuff that is a result of ideas about the self. One of those ideas is about the selfness of Russia, which is claiming that it owned, you know, it owned that land first, and so it should have it. And some people are supporting that, but they don't think Palestine should have its land first, or they don't think, you know, all this selective. And so now I need to slow myself down. And I'm going to talk about Dogen, because stepping away from the noise of the political world is essential. Just like we sat for half an hour and we listened to chanting before that. We need to take care of ourselves. And so Ehe Dogen, the founder of our school, said this about the self. He said, to carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. Those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas. Those who are greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings. So carrying yourself forward means I'm here, me, I. And I go through this life, I have experiences, delusion, but myriad things come forth and experience themselves. And that can be, you know, that's been translated in different ways. But here we go. To be awake is not to think that I am experiencing, it's to recognize that all the myriad things are experiencing. So I started the title with this phrase, together with all beings, which is a phrase that we use a lot in my particular tradition, in my teacher's tradition. That there's nothing that I do alone. this self that's here, this one, is created by, well, right now, by all of you listening, each one of you in a different way, also created by a personal history, also created by other factors in my life. For instance, I had breakfast today, and I have a glass of water that I can drink when I want to, and I'm warm enough. I feel basically physically safe. All of these are factors. And then everything that I read, some of those things I read before, everything I read creates me, and every experience that I've had creates me. So all of my past creates this person, and all of the present creates this person. And there's no separation at all. And so you could say myriad things come forth and experience themselves through this person. You could say that to explain why do I have eyes and ears and other senses and a mind? This is just a vehicle for experience. There's a point of experience here. And then there's that aspect of the mind that tries to manage things. And there's the aspect of the mind that stores history. And there's the aspect of the mind that's just like a mirror. Like, oh, it's just, oh. Easy to say. That's why we sit on a cushion for a long time, is to let some of the more complicated ones slip away a little bit. How you practice with this, from the same text, the Genjo Koan, he says, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. And I'm just going to use that line. It's pretty famous. It's like you study yourself. And so one of the things that people do in sitting zazen or in practicing mindfulness is to notice what's happening. You know, that kind of tracking, the attending, oh, now I'm moving my hand. Now I'm hearing a sound. I don't know what that sound is. Might just be in my head. Now I'm having a thought, which is what am I going to say next? But studying the self, and then we study the self some more. And I mentioned these different selves, you know. So I could be sitting here and noticing that I have an urge to manage things. Like I start planning. Or I could be sitting here and I just notice the sensations. Or I could be sitting here and I notice that my mind has gone off into remembering stuff. And just being aware of those things is a practice of noticing. And often I've noticed, I won't say 100%, but if I'm sitting and I wish to be calm, you know, I wish to be doing that thing we call sit zazen, and a thought comes up, and a lot of times these thoughts seem to be like they want to prove that I exist, or they want to prove that I'm a certain kind of person. Maybe I'm a wise person. Maybe I'm a good person. Or maybe I'm a sad person. Maybe I'm a victim. Maybe I'm regretting something that I did before. So I could be both a bad person and a good person. But all kinds of thoughts come up, and thoughts are so intimately related to the suffering that we have. that it's really helpful to notice thoughts. So I have a poem. I don't think it's for right now. So what I'm going to do is invite discussion. And if there are questions or comments, we'll go there first. And if not, I have a few questions to help us go. So thank you for listening. And please ask.